Often on this channel I like to talk about DOS games that are obscure or not very well known or just underrated. And then there's other times there's games like this. One thing I have noticed about videos on YouTube about Quake is they're either done by people who have never played the game and are not familiar with shooters, or they're done by people who have played thousands of hours of Quake and know every single little tiny detail about it. And that's where this video differs somewhat. Though I haven't played Quake before, amazingly, I do know about retro shooters. I have played a lot of retro shooters, back when they were called first-person shooters, not retro shooters. So I'll just be talking about it and giving my thoughts on the matter. Believe it or not, I do think Quake is underrated. Because when people talk about Quake and they have fond memories of Quake, usually they're talking about the multiplayer, or the legacy of the engine and how important it was. Or they're talking about Doom and they're saying, hey look, this is the fully 3D sequel to Doom. Generally they don't actually talk about Quake, as in the single player game of Quake in the Quake engine. Instead of this doomed space marine, you are a ranger, and that makes almost no difference whatsoever. You move about a little differently and there's more verticality, but for the most part you're just some generic soldier guy who has to kill all the baddies. But instead of a colourful palette of a space station that is slowly consumed by hell, you're greeted with a lot of brown. And in general a macabre, twisted, demented, sort of psychological torment of a game. And the reason for that is a man called H.P. Lovecraft, who again is massively underrated, and yet loads of people know who he is. H.P. Lovecraft was a turn-of-the-century horror writer, and I mean last century, not this one, and he wrote all about the Cthulhu mythos and all these horrific things happening to people and all this terrible stuff going on in short story format for the most part. And the id Software boys clearly took influence from that in their design of their creatures and the atmosphere in general, and you'll hear me go on and say this about 600 times. Atmosphere. Quake is all about atmosphere. From the colour palette, to the monster design, to the music and sound direction, it's all about steeping you in this nightmarish world and just not letting you have a break or letting you off the hook. The most commonly pointed out thing about Quake is that it's fully 3D, and this was a big thing back in 1996. I mean, you'd had Descent by Parallax Software, and that was, about it. One of the drawbacks of having a fully 3D environment was the monsters and how you engage them. Rather than having hordes and hordes of evil monsters to mow down with your machine gun, you instead had a select group of monsters which could take quite a few hits and could technically take you down by themselves if they wanted and you were stupid enough or inopportune, and this results in a different style of combat where you have to focus on individuals rather than mowing down endless monsters. When I played it for the Random DOS Game Show, one of the first things I noticed was the movement. With one or two control changes, it's more or less modern. And that's one of the downsides with Quake, really. I mean, anytime anyone talks about it, it's always Quake pioneered this, or Quake was the jumping off point for that. Quake, the game, is actually really fun to play. One thing of note, I've mentioned the music briefly. The music in the background of this video is not the music of the game. That's because the music's done by Nine Inch Nails, who is widely regarded as one of the greatest of his genre, if not the greatest. id Software came along and said, hey, you want to do the music for this? He was like, yeah, I can do some horrific stuff in the background of your horrific game to make it even more horrific. So have some of my music in the background instead, because everyone loves my music. After figuring out, hey, this is fully 3D, and hey, these controls are cool, you'll notice that the level selection has gone from menu to level. You have a level that is the level selection. You wander around specific corridors to determine the difficulty of the campaign, and then you select the episode by going through a specific door. This is really cool because it allowed people who had come from Doom to familiarise themselves with the new movement and 3D environment of Quake. The first level introduces things like bumping into things in order to activate them and jumping across gaps and so on. Things that we sort of take as commonplace now, but again, it wasn't a thing you did in Doom. Massive thumbs up for the initial level design that just eases the player in. You start off with typical grunts with their shotguns, and it's more or less a cross between a Doom zombie man and a shotgunner. Then you have some dogs, which are pretty much a showcase. It's like, hey, look, we can make enemies that move really quickly. After that, it's just a gradual ramping up of the difficulty, as it introduces more and more monsters. You have the knights with their swords that can make quick work of you, and then you have the ogres with their grenade launchers, which are an absolute pain, especially if they get up close to you and pull out a chainsaw. A lot of these monsters have alternate attacks, and because of that, you have to make sure that you have them in the right environment. Likewise, if they're in a hard to reach position and you can't quite shoot at them, and they have their long-ranged attack ready to go, they can be a real pain. But James, I'm an expert at shooters. I'll not get myself into these terrible positions. No, you're wrong. You will get into these terrible positions because the map design and the verticality of the map design places you in those situations whether you want to be or not. Quake is not afraid to screw you over. You're heading into a hideous, macabre death trap. And the game likes to remind you of that every now and then. Just when you think, oh no, I've got the layout of the land now, I know how things are going, it'll spring either a deadly trap, a confusing puzzle, or just a terrible room which logistically makes it very difficult to kill the monsters in. You've got 4 ammo types and 8 weapons. You have an axe, which is last resort and not very useful. You have a single-barreled shotgun that is horribly underpowered, which can be upgraded to a double-barrel shotgun, which is a bit better but nowhere near as good as a super shotgun from Doom 2. After that, you pick up a nail gun, which fires 9-inch nails. You get it? And they have a wee 9-inch nails logo on. Yeah, good addition. And it has twice the ammo capacity of all the rest of them. And it can be upgraded to the super nail gun, which is a lot of fun. You have a grenade launcher, which serves a double purpose. Yes, it's really good for long-range explodiness, and the accuracy can be a bit difficult until you figure it all out, with the grenades bouncing off walls and getting tangled up in things you'd rather they wouldn't, and oh no, suddenly somebody's in close quarters and you accidentally fired a grenade and lost half your health. Yes, there's splash damage, but it also works as a zombie killing device. You've got a rocket launcher, which is pretty much like a grenade launcher. It takes the same ammo and it fires straight, which makes it a lot more effective in terms of aiming. Though again, if you happen to have a rocket launcher and enemies are up close, you're going to eviscerate yourself in an exploding bloody mess, and you don't want that. Speaking of weapons that can kill you, you have the Thunderbolt Launcher, which can fire streams of electricity using energy cells and destroy anything in short measure. And the downside to it? Well, it can be used in close quarters, it can be used from far away, but you can't use it in water. Otherwise, it's instant death via electrocution because, yeah, obviously. So I've talked about these levels with twists and turns, I've talked about enemies to some degree, and I've talked about your weaponry with which to tear them to pieces. But I haven't actually talked about the game all that much. The level designers clearly had fun making all these super 3D environments and stuff, and there's a great deal of verticality which wasn't present in the previous shooters from id. And aside from a few suspect platforming elements, first-person platforming, never make me do it, and puzzles, hooray, environmental puzzles, my favourite, not. Other than those, yeah, it's a classic, it's really good. The problem is it's been overshadowed by the legacy of the engine and the multiplayer scene that it spawned. You're ploughing through episode 3 and you're having a jolly old time, and then episode 4 starts. And you're like, Who was episode 4 by? Yeah, that guy who did all the bad levels on Doom 2. His levels are much larger and more expansive and require tracking back for various bits and pieces, and it turns into a bit of a slog. But the worst thing about it was the last minute decision to add some enemies. These horrible blob creatures that you just can't seem to kill before they explode in your face, and it's just a bit of a pain. It really is. The single player was like, yeah, cool. This is a tech demo for this incredible atmosphere where we can blow up our friends. And then subsequently, every single shooter that wasn't on the Unreal Engine borrowed some of Quake's code to some degree, whether it was Half-Life, Call of Duty, Medal of Honor, you name it, they were all there. So the legacy of Quake as this incredible multiplayer experience that advanced shooting through its fully 3D engine that was licensed out to so many other games means that the single player, it's sort of like, yeah, oh, Quake had a single player, oh, okay, yeah. It's a really well done shooter, and I'd argue that it's a classic. People say Doom changed everything and codified how first-person shooters run nowadays, but personally, having played Quake now properly, I feel like it has had just as much an influence, if not more than Doom, with how first-person shooters are looking and running today. Give it a try! Quake! It's good for you!